Hello and welcome to today's edition of Velocity Kinetics. It's been a long day, and there was something I read this morning that absolutely got my goat. It was something that for UK, it only applies to UK motorists. Whether other countries would then follow suit if the UK brought this in. However, the UK has tried to bring this in once before, back in 2007, and it was met with major opposition. I'm talking about being charged for using the roads, not road tax. And I'll explain what's going on, but I've just got in from work. I've just done a quick job outside that needed doing, so I need to get changed first, and then I'll explain what's going on. So, what do I mean? Well, before I go any further, I'm just going to say that I'm going to edit this video in a slightly different fashion to how I do things normally. But I also need to say that this issue winds me up quite a lot. So you might see some very angry, or at least angry for Velocity Kinetics, comments on this. Now, at the moment in the UK, when you own a car, you pay road tax. That is the be-all and end-all. You own a car, you must pay road fund license tax to put the car on the road. But there are some exemptions to road fund license tax. The exemptions are vehicles used by a disabled person, disabled passenger vehicles, mobility scooters and powered wheelchairs, historic vehicles, so these are vehicles made before the 1st of January 1980. Electric vehicles are exempt. The electricity must come from an external source or an electric storage battery not connected to any source of power when the vehicle is moving to be exempt. Mowing machines, so ride-on lawnmowers, steam vehicles, so guess you could say traction engine, it's about all that's steam powered that goes on the road these days, and vehicles used for agriculture, horticulture and forestry, so tractors essentially. That's not many vehicles that are exempt, especially with people being encouraged to buy new cars through things like the scrappage scheme. The option of cars older than 1980 is becoming scarcer and scarcer, but also up to a certain point those cars will be becoming borderline too expensive to run. However, that said, if it's a proper classic like a Cozzy or a Lotus Cortina, you could go on and on and on and on with all sorts of vehicles before 1980. But at the moment, before 1980, to be exempt and not pay. But then if you think about it, every car in the UK now, from the smart car to the Range Rover and everything in between and over and above, you pay tax for. And likewise for a moped, and for motorbikes from the smallest cc up to the biggest cc, you pay road fund license tax. In theory, road fund license tax goes on maintaining the roads. In the UK, we have some of the shittest roads on the planet. Some of the greatest driving roads, but some of the shittest maintained. What Rishi Sunak has apparently proposed, and I was reading this on what I call my Android feed, so on my phone, I have an Android phone, so on the Android home screen, I believe it was Hull Today that it came up on. I don't know why I got Hull Today on my feed, but nonetheless, I've seen it written elsewhere, and people aren't entirely sure what to make of it. Now, the Tony Blair Labour government in 2007 proposed charging per mile. This is what Rishi Sunak is proposing at the moment. It's supposedly to plug a hole in the budget because of COVID. Never fucking mind chasing companies that owe the UK millions and potentially billions in back tax like Google and Amazon. Never mind them. They won't be chased for their money. It's the fucking motorist that has to pay again. we pay enough in the UK. Let's put it this way, let's take a new car, and we're going to use an example. Well, it's actually probably going to be more of a quote. And this is from James May on an episode of Top Gear quite a few years ago, but he's right. Now, his example was in relation to the congestion charge to drive in the centre of London. Now, that doesn't fucking bother me, because I don't live in London. I don't have to drive into mid-London. For the most part, you probably couldn't pay me enough to drive into London. But anyway, when you buy a brand new car in the UK, you obviously have to pay, you have the car, then you pay something called VAT, value added tax, on the car. That's just to get it off the forecourt. But before you get the car, so that car might be legally yours once you paid for it. Whether that's on finance, whether that's through being well enough off to buy it. But then you got to buy some road fund license tax to put the car on the road for it to be allowed to be there. Okay, fine. You got to buy some insurance too, and then you got to pay insurance premium tax. Okay, so once you got all that, so you got your car, you paid your VAT, you got your road fund tax, you got insurance and paid insurance premium tax as part of that. You've then got to put stuff in the bloody car to make it move. So whatever you've put in, petrol or diesel, you go to the fuel pump. You then have to pay as part of it. It's granted, it's factored into the price, so it doesn't suddenly come on after the end of the transaction. But we have to pay fuel duty tax on our petrol and diesel, and then you pay value added tax on the fuel duty tax. So up until that point, just for a motorist, your average motorist, to go to work, never mind to do anything for fun, or what they need to do, whether that's family related, just to go to work, to be able to afford to buy and run the car, that is a lot of money coming out of your pocket. A few years ago, road tax was made a lot cheaper in the UK. If you had a car that emitted less than 100 grams of CO2 per kilometre, you didn't have to pay any fuel tax. It was basically 99 was the magic number. And a lot of manufacturers answered the call. Ford, EcoBoost, Suzuki, Boosterjet, Honda, PowerBoost, and any other combination, Fiat Twin Air, any other combination of engine you can think of where they cut the emissions massively, going smaller and turbocharged. That's how they cut the emissions. Granted, we're not going to delve in to people fiddling the emissions. They just answered the requirement to get it below. Then you were getting people who could, because it was such a small amount, a lot of manufacturers were chucking in the first year tax for nothing. On my Swift, first year of tax was nothing, and then £35 for that year. My Baleno, my first Baleno, should I say, free tax for the first year, £35 a year thereafter. This current Baleno is £150 a year. So in about 2018, I believe it was, they changed the rules and increased the cost. Now, for me, as I travel, I pay £150 a year for my tax, or at least that's what it was this year. Yeah, this year. I had to check my credit card statement a few minutes ago to check. It was £150. So it's not. So on the one hand, it's not an awful lot, but you've still got to have £150 available, whether that is spread out over the course of the year on direct debit, or whether you've got to have enough credit on your credit card to pay it, or enough money in savings, or what have you. You've got to have enough money to pay it. That said, though, the trade-off is £150, and if you do 15,000 miles a year, that's 1 penny a mile. 1 penny a mile for using your car. Which, in some ways, isn't too bad. However, the cost of road tax in the UK means that quite a lot of people do avoid paying tax. And I don't mean as in they're exempt. They just don't pay it, which isn't fair on those of us who do. In the UK at the moment, as we've mentioned in the exemptions, if your car is electric, you don't pay. Now, the UK government has brought forward its data when it wants to go all electric on all cars that are on sale from 2040 to 2030. That's going to be a separate video because that is just not feasible and not necessarily the answer. But we're going to try not to go off course too much with this. But they're pushing that forward, so then more and more people are buying electric vehicles. So guess what? Suddenly more and more cars are becoming exempt. Hang on a minute. those of us who drive traditional combustion engines will probably be left to pick up the tab. And if the tab goes up, then you'll probably find more people avoiding paying the tax and more police time wasted chasing people who aren't paying tax, and potentially more vehicles being seized. But I wish I could say that's the ranty part of this video over, but it's not. So as is, that's quite an expensive element to your work or your existence, however you want to look at it. My issue is electric cars not being taxed isn't fair. You are on the road, or shall I include electric motorbikes too, electric power vehicles, you're on the road and you're not paying to be there. Now, some of me wouldn't quite go to the extreme of charging cyclists to be there. I sort of blow hot and cold on that, but ultimately I sort of probably go the direction of why charge, because it's exercise, it's green transport, you know, why charge for that? But electric cars, you've got cars that can out-accelerate some of the fastest supercars on the planet that are electric, but obviously being electric are exempt from taxes. Like, hang on a minute. Why should a car that can go 0 to 60 in 2 seconds or less and have the equivalent of about 700 horsepower, like things like the Tesla Model S, the Porsche Taycan, I think it's pronounced, the new electric Porsche, why should they be exempt? Or Polestar 2, that's got about 600 horsepower as part of it. Why should that be exempt? There's no reason for it. Now, this new proposal, like I said, Tony Blair proposed it in 2007. It was universally panned by motorists. It was arguably one of the dumbest things he did, besides agreeing with George Bush to invade Iraq. But what Rishi Sunak now wants to do, he's proposing, is to charge people by the mile. And that's ridiculous. Number one, how are you going to charge people by the mile? You've either got to fit every car in the UK with a black box. That then means you've got to get people to agree to have a black box fitted. Now, I personally wouldn't agree to have a black box fitted to my car. The only box of any sort that I would agree to be fitted by way of tracking is a tracker. So if the car is stolen, guess what? They can track it down by activating said tracker. That's about as much of that I would agree to have put on my car, aside from a telemetry box of my own choosing because I'm interested in how much throttle I'm applying. But unless it's something for my own purposes, that's the only other thing I would agree. That's the only thing I would agree to put on. So you've either got to get everyone to agree to have a black box fitted, and then there's the cost of getting that fitted. Have I then got to pay for the black box because you want to change the way things are done? Is it going to be a case you have to submit a mileage return every year, in which case what's to stop me from lying about how many miles I've done? Police have got better things to do with their time than go, you've done more than 4,000 miles, son. They've got a lot more better things to be doing than that. Is it going to be by camera? Well, I don't physically see how it's going to be possible. For instance, my commute from where I live to where I work is 26.2 miles one way, and it's mostly country roads. So you're telling me you're going to then cover every single last country road and bit back in A road, C road, B road, D road. I know I did that out of order, but you're telling me you're going to get cameras up everywhere to track where people are going. The argument is fundamentally flawed from the get-go. The other issue is the costing. Essentially, in principle, the only part of the idea that is any good is it makes people think twice about, do they need to make the journey, or do they need to make the journey now? However, the cost of motoring in the UK, as mentioned, with purchasing the car and the VAT and the fuel duty tax and the current road fund licence tax, for a lot of people that is already nearly too much for them to run a car. Then adding something that's probably going to end up being more expensive and having, let's say, motorists fit the bloody bill again is not on. It would then be a case of people being charged at peak times and being charged more at peak times. Now, for those people who work nights, that'll be absolutely brilliant in theory, and depending on when your night shift finishes. or people who work part nights, they'll be absolute laughing. But for those of us who work a traditional office job, so people who work in classic offices or banks or things like that that are traditional 9 to 5, you're going to be charged more for the privilege of going to work, or at least under what they believe is going to happen. And this has come from an RAC spokesperson, that they believe that's how it's going to work to fit, let's say, to plug the hole in the budget. That would potentially then mean that people will need to change what shifts they do, but that also might mean that people start working a lot longer for more. Like, can you honestly think in the UK how ingrained and how long a bank is open for? Most banks are traditionally open 9 to 5. I'm going to say banks because that's my work industry. And before people go off about where you're a banker, like, fuck off. When people like Boris Johnson talk about saving the bankers, they're talking about saving investment bankers, not people in your local building society or high street bank. Not those people. They'll throw those people under the bus in a fucking second. But do you really expect a bank to change that from what is traditionally 9 to 5, maybe 9 till 1 or 9 till 2 on a Saturday, to then change to being 8 till 4 or 8 till 6 or 7:30 till 6 or something like that to make it cheaper? Unless employers are going to start allowing you to claim your tax, start giving you an allowance for tax to get to work, or whether you're going to be able to start claiming that tax back, but you still got the bloody money to be able to do it. The idea is just flawed beyond all measure. The idea of people being charged to drive at off-peak times because it's cheaper, yes, that might work, but then that suddenly might move when the peak time is. For instance, when Sarah and I, when we lived in South Shields, and we used to come down to Thetford to visit my parents, we'd taken to either leaving when I finished work, so if I finished work before 7 o'clock in the evening, I'd basically come home, have stuffed something quickly down my throat so my belly wasn't rumbling for the whole drive, and then we'd set off and I wouldn't get to Thetford until about 11, half 11 at night. Or we'd leave at about 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. Again, to enjoy the quiet roads to make progress. And trust me on this, when we did this is just following the A1 and then the A4, A14 and then the A11. Leaving South Shields at that time in the morning, even allowing nearly an hour to stop at Grantham. The power that momentum has, if you've never experienced anything like it, next time you've got to do a long trip, go as early as you think you can cope. As long as you obviously haven't got to be there. Say, for instance, if you've got to check in, if you're going on holiday, for example, and checking in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, then what's the point in getting there by 11 o'clock in the morning? You know, unless you're planning on making a day of it. But next time you've got a long trip to do that doesn't have any set time when you need to get there, try going early in the morning. The power of momentum. You're not speeding, just going along at 70 miles an hour. The amount of progress you make in that time is ridiculous. But then under this new scheme, if it comes in, and I might be getting cross for nothing, and I hope I'm getting cross for nothing, but under this new scheme, if it comes in, that potentially is going to change what peak time is. So then suddenly leaving for your holiday at 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, won't be as cheap as it once was. Or it is just infuriating beyond belief. Now, one other major problem within this plan, regardless of how many 100 or 1,000 miles that are given for free, if any are going to be given for free, and when I've had a quick look online, so I'm trying to desperately find the article that I want to give you the link to, just because it had the numbers in it that I'm going to use in a minute. I can't seem to find the sodding thing. But within all this, the number of people who don't live anywhere where there is decent public transport. Now, for me, I detest most forms of public transport. More because my argument is I learnt to drive, I paid for it, I'm going to drive. Don't get me wrong, there are times where a bus is a far better option. Like, for instance, from where I live, if I need to go into Cambridge, a park and ride's far better, or the train. Actually, I quite like getting the train, but I also quite like trains. But if you live somewhere, like, for instance, between 2000 and 2006, I lived in a village in the middle of nowhere in Lincolnshire. The only public transport that came through, if you can even call it public transport, well, it wasn't really public transport, so it wasn't public transport, was the school bus. When you're on holiday, there were no buses. There was a random bus that turned up in the village once a month, and that might have actually been patient transport, for all I know. But there was no public transport. The nearest town of in any way, shape or form was Long Sutton, 5.5 miles away. A slightly bigger town in the form of Holbeach was 6 miles away. That's one way. Where I went to school in Spalding, that was, depending on which route you took, that was anywhere between 12 to 15 miles away. If you've got to start doing that distance on public transport, number one, the inordinate amount of time that's going to take. Put this into context, about a 5-mile bus journey, or how long that can potentially take. When Sarah and I lived in Middlesbrough, we lived in Middlesbrough, quite close to the middle, and Sarah worked in Colby Newham, which is about 5 miles away. Not a huge distance, not unreasonable, but not walkable, as in the pavements weren't there, and being a care assistant, you can't be turning up sweaty and out of breath and huffing and puffing and with muscle fatigue. That's just not on. But a bus for Sarah, if I went to pick Sarah up, I could usually, depending on what this traffic light situation was, assuming I got mostly greens on the way, 15 minutes, because most of it was 30 miles an hour, about 15-ish minutes, I'd be in Colby from where we lived in Middlesbrough. Not too bad. On the bus, it would take Sarah nearly 50 minutes because it had to go all around various housing estates. But 50 minutes for a 5-mile journey, that's just not on. Never mind the fact that the buses don't travel. It's going to possibly put up the costs for taxis and cabs and Ubers and Lyft, what have you. It's going to put the cost of those up. Now, like I said, I know in terms of the Treasury, Rishi Sunak needs to get money back in. And I appreciate that and as much as we really don't like it, a government comes down to a bank balance, like most things, whether it's a church, a business, a government, school, it comes down to a bank balance. And if the money's not there, things can't happen. But there are other ways to get the money in. And like I said, motorists shouldering most of it is not possible. Now, on to some mathematics. The article I was reading earlier on quoted numbers based on using the current levels of fuel duty tax. Because the representative they spoke to from the RAC believed that is what they were going to do. And the fact that at the point of that article being written, the Treasury had not responded and had remained very quiet about the scheme, suggests that they're probably not a million miles away. So, mathematics. So, in the UK, fuel duty tax is 57.95 pence per litre. That is quite a lot. The petrol I put in on Saturday, I put in Tesco's Mentum 99, which is their 99 RON petrol, the higher octane fuel. That was £1 15.9 pence per litre. So 57.95 pence of that was fuel duty tax. Never mind value added tax. That was just fuel duty tax. If they're going to charge this on the basis of using fuel duty levels, that's an inordinate amount of money. Bearing in mind that if we go back to the calculation that we did, so time for the maths, that I paid £150 a year for my road tax for this year, and if I do about 15,000 miles a year, I'm paying 0.01 pence. So I'm paying a penny, I beg your pardon, 0.01 pence. I wish. I was paying a penny a mile, which isn't... It's still a pain in the arse, but it's not too bad. But based on this new scheme, so we'll do it at 57 pence, we're going to times it by 15,000. About the number of miles I do. If they use that, now, like I said, that number seems high to me. But if they do that, And like I said, and the article I read, someone from the Royal Automobile Club, the RAC in the UK, reckon that that's probably what they would use, which if they are going to use it, then holy fuck. I earn £19,700 a year at the moment. That's before my tax, my national insurance, my pension contributions, you name it. If they go for the 57.95 pence a mile charge, I round down to 57 pence a mile. I'll be paying £8,550 just for the privilege of going to work. Never mind keeping the roof over my head. Never mind my bills. Never mind my phone bill, putting petrol in the car, or food bill, luxuries, holiday, mine Sarah's wedding. Never mind anything like that. £8,550 just to go to work. That's not on. And again, using that 57 pence a mile logic, it used to be 227 miles, if I remember correctly, from my front door in South Shields when we lived up there to my parents' house. So 0.57 times 227, I would be paying £129.39 just to go see my parents. Never mind going home. That'd be nearly £260, potentially, because we'd sometimes only see them for a weekend. £260 sometimes to see them for 2 days. That's not on. I imagine, though, they'll probably, I think 57.95, with the Tory government, it's not out the realms of possibility, but it seems too high. But it's not necessarily out of the realms of possibility, because the journalist in the article I read said that people have contacted the Treasury for comment, and there's no response. The fact that there's no response is the concerning part, because it may be very, very true. Now, unless I'm going to get a monstrous pay rise to accommodate this, and bearing in mind the company I work for made a loss of over 150 million so far this year just because of COVID, it doesn't seem fair. 1 minute we're all in this together, then the next we're not. And that's just the unfortunate way things are going in the UK at the moment. And it's impossible to say what the right thing is to do with this. I personally think you should be taxed on the amount of power your car produces. And why do I say that? I don't think it should be a charge, necessarily should be a charge per horsepower or per PS, because you can argue over the course of time, your car's engine deteriorates. Even with good servicing, you'll lose horsepower, you lose PS, you lose torque. Whichever way around you look at it, you lose power over time. But I think the power bands that your car came out in originally should be what it's used for, as in to work it out. That way, that means everyone will still keep the exemption in for disabled drivers and disabled vehicles, and for agricultural vehicles, but for petrol and electric vehicles, it's down to power. So those people with their 600, 700 horsepower Tesla Model S's will pay the correct amount of money. Now you might argue, yes, but that's a more expensive car, they paid more in VAT and things to own the car. Maybe. But they've got to pay for it to be on the fucking road. I personally think it should be on a basis of, let me think, I think it should be 50 horsepower intervals. So from 1 horsepower, but this is the exception though, so 0 to 50, 1 to 50 horsepower should be about £10 a year. Maybe 15. And then 51 to 100 horsepower should be £25 to £35 a year. Then 101 to 150, that should be about 25 to 40, 35 to 45 pounds a year. You see where I'm going. You're doing 50 horsepower intervals on what the car was originally produced on. Everyone is the same. Petrol, diesel, fuel cell, electric, hybrid, you name it. You keep that the same across the board and you're onto something. You're onto something far fairer. You're onto something far better. If your car is listed as being modified, then that admittedly is where that idea falls down, and potentially those cars might have to be subject to separate dynamo testing. And at the point of the modification being done, they get put on the dyno. What horsepower it produces at that point is then what band it falls into for tax. And that's how I think it should be done. Charge per mile is just not on. Because like I said, even the penny per mile that my tax roughly works out at for road fund tax, it's just too much. Arguably, though, the current system of a flat charge for everyone is probably the best, because regardless of how much or how little you use your car, it's the same. And that's the only time where a flat tax system works the best. I hope I've given people something to think about in this video. If this goes viral for whatever reason, I don't care whether it does or doesn't. I just need to say my piece about this being charged per mile, because it is wrong beyond all measure. And back to what I said at that part of the video. Why are motorists the ones that always fit the fucking bill? Anyway, enjoy yourselves, have a good evening, and we'll see you in another video.